Hi, everyone. My name is Lori Peak. I am a professor of sociology and the director of the Natural Hazard Center here at the University of Colorado Boulder. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the Making Mitigation Work webinar series hosted by the Natural Hazard Center with the support of the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the National Science Foundation. This webinar series highlights recent progress in mitigation policy, practice, and research. We are so grateful that you have joined us today. Before we begin the webinar presentation, we did want to note that this forum is being recorded. The captioned webinar video and the presentation slides will be posted online at the Natural Hazard Center website at hazards.colorado.edu. This is also where you can find the recordings and supplemental materials from the last 2 months of Making Mitigation Work webinars, which featured Keith Porter from the University of Colorado Boulder and SPA Risk LLC in September, and Angela Gladwell from the Federal Emergency Management Agency in August, respectively. On behalf of the entire team here at the Natural Hazard Center, we want to thank FEMA and the National Science Foundation for their support, which has helped to make this webinar series possible. In addition, we acknowledge and thank all of you who have dialed in today. We know your time is valuable, and we appreciate you sharing it with us today. We also have an important announcement to share with all of you. Thanks to our ongoing partnership with the International Association of Emergency Managers, we can now offer 1 contact hour of emergency management training through the IAEM certification program for those who are logged on to the live webinar and stay for the full duration. Please visit the Making Mitigation Work website and contact Katie Murphy at Catherine with a K, Catherine.murphy-1@colorado.edu for more information on receiving your certificate for attending this webinar today. We want to offer our gratitude to IAEM for making this possible, and I especially want to thank Katie Murphy and the team here at the Natural Hazard Center for helping to turn this possibility into a reality. If at any point during the presentation you have questions or comments, you can offer those either via the chat function or the Q&A box on Zoom. You can set the chat function so only the administrators and presenters can see your comments, or so that everyone on the webinar sees them. We have over 260 persons signed up for this webinar today, and we are very much looking forward to hearing from all of you. And I understand that our presenter has some questions embedded in the presentation today. So we will again look forward to receiving your questions and comments and hope you will use the Q&A or the chat function. If our speaker does not have time to answer all of your questions and comments today during the webinar, we will share them with him and then post his written responses via the Making Mitigation Work webinar page on our hazards.colorado.edu website. I am so pleased to now introduce you to our speaker for today's webinar, Eric Lepvin. Eric is the Deputy Assistant Administrator for Mitigation at FEMA, where he directs pre- and post-disaster mitigation programs. These programs include the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, the Pre-Disaster Mitigation Grant Program, Flood Mitigation Assistance Grants, and the floodplain management component of the National Flood Insurance Program, as well as the NFIP Community Rating System. Eric also leads the hazard mitigation workforce and disaster operations for FEMA's Federal Insurance and Mitigation Administration. Eric, thank you for taking time away from these many responsibilities to join us all today. We are very much looking forward to learning from you about the recent progress with the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, or BRIC, program. I'm going to turn the slide presentation capabilities over to you now. As we make that transition, I hope all of our participants will join in offering a warm virtual welcome. Eric, over to you.
All right, sorry for the delay. Again, I'm Eric Letvin. I'm here to talk about the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program. But first, I'd like to, moving to the next slide, talk about the Disaster Recovery Reform Act much more broadly. So this act was passed just over a year ago. And it was very important. Congress transformed the field of emergency management with the passage of this legislation. So these important reforms to many of our programs here at FEMA originated as lessons learned from the disruption from Harvey, Irma, Maria, and the Camp wildfire. So this legislation was passed about a year ago. There's over 50 provisions in the DRRA, Disaster Recovery Reform Act legislation. We just wrote an article a few days ago in The Hill, an op-ed. So far up to date, we have, we're on track to implement over 75% of those 50 provisions by the end of the year. So many changes to many of our programs. I'm the accountable executive for about 12 of those 50 provisions. We're going to talk about just one of them today, what we call at FEMA the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Grant Program, which is Section 1234 of the Disaster Recovery Reform Act. So go on to the next slide. So FEMA's goal is to reduce costs and loss of human life, reduce suffering and natural hazards, build a national culture of preparedness, encouraging investments to protect our communities and infrastructure. If you haven't read our FEMA strategic plan, it's up on our website. This really ties in very closely with what we're trying to accomplish. So let me talk a little bit about pre-disaster mitigation. And I know a lot of folks on the phone may be very familiar with it and some not as familiar with it. So we have had an existing, we actually have two pre-disaster mitigation grant programs, one focused on repetitive loss flooding called Flood Mitigation Assistance. And then we've had a program since 2003 called Pre-Disaster Mitigation. So on the slide here, or PDM, Pre-Disaster Mitigation, that was a line item appropriation that we received when Congress passed a budget each year. Those amounts have gone up and down over the years. It's been as low as $25 million. Fortunately, over the last couple of years, Congress appropriated $250 million in 2018, and I'll get to 2019 in a minute, for pre-disaster mitigation. So a couple things with pre-disaster mitigation. One, the dollars will go up or go down. And two is we receive that appropriation whenever the budget is passed. And so if you're working in communities and you have vulnerabilities, and you've done your hazard planning, you're looking for funding typically to try to help mitigate those vulnerabilities, to mitigate that risk. And so it has certainly been a challenge. We've run pre-disaster mitigation. For the most part, it's been a competition. So a wildfire project in California may compete against a flood project in Massachusetts. And having funding that may come out during different times of the year and for different amounts, it definitely has created some frustration from our stakeholders over the years. So what this section 1234, Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, what it essentially did was replace the pre-disaster mitigation grant program. And I'll talk about how that actually works in a second. As we are building this new Pre-Disaster Mitigation Grant Program, BRIC, the word infrastructure is in the legislation. So we are taking that, Congress is telling us that they do want to fund infrastructure type of projects. But we have taken it upon ourselves to do a lot of stakeholder outreach and hear from folks. So I'll talk about that in a minute. What should this program be? We have a lot of risks in this country. How do we design a grant program to be reflective of funding good projects that reduce risk over time? So we have some guiding principles: supporting communities through capability and capacity building, encourage and enable innovation, promoting partnerships, enable large projects that's tied to infrastructure that I just mentioned, maintain flexibility, and provide consistency. So this next slide, and I'm going to stop after the slide and take some initial questions on this. I want to talk about this last year of pre-disaster mitigation. Congress told us that we needed to make $250 million of mitigation money available this year. So this is the last year of the Pre-Disaster Mitigation Grant Program. We just issued a notice of funding opportunity in August and opened the grant application period about a week ago. Those applications are due back to us at the end of January, although a lot of states will typically ask for them before that, maybe a month before that. So what does that mean? If you are a hazard researcher, or if you're a planner, or you're working in a community and you have a good project, there is an open application period where you can submit a proposal to FEMA, an application to get that project mitigated. How does that work? So communities are what we call sub-applicants, and then the communities need to apply to the state. It's a state designated agency by the governor. It's typically, but not always, a state emergency management office. And then that state emergency management office will submit the final application to FEMA. We've pretty much run that program that way for, since the beginning of PDM, since 2003. So the states are very familiar with it. Many communities are very familiar with it. And we have funded many projects using pre-disaster mitigation. So how does BRIC work? So BRIC, by law, and this is really the innovative part here, where we spend about 90 cents out of the dollar of our mitigation dollars post-disaster through our post-disaster grant program. Very little up front. So we want to move mitigation forward and try to mitigate these, communities, make communities more resilient pre-disaster. So what BRIC does is it pulls 6% of the funds from each disaster at the 6-month point. Without getting really complicated, and I can take some questions on that, as long as your state has received a disaster in the last 7 years, they are eligible for BRIC. We estimate it'll be between $300 and $500 million per year if you look at like a 6-year average. So number one, we're going to have, on the average, more money available for pre-disaster mitigation. And two, we no longer have to wait for Congress to pass an appropriation. That 6% comes in automatically from our disaster relief fund. So at every 6 months for every disaster, and like last month, we just received the 6-month lock-in from the Nebraska floods. Essentially a bag of money gets put into the piggy bank, and that piggy bank continues to grow. So we have roughly $353 million in the piggy bank right now, and by law, Congress told us to use those funds, these Section 1, 2, 3, 4 funds, for the last year of the Pre-Disaster Mitigation Grant Program. And so that piggy bank will continue to accumulate money from the 6-month lock-ins. So how much money will it be? I said 3 to 500 million. If we would have had this law after 2017 with Harvey, Irma, and Maria, we would have had $3.3 billion of mitigation money for the next year. So one of the challenges with the program is that the money will go up or down depending on the previous year's disaster activity. The advantage is now we don't have to wait for Congress to pass a budget, and we, FEMA, can control the cycle. So we could, for example, make the money available at the same time every year to make it more predictable for our stakeholders. So the amount of money we just made available that I talked about this last year, pre-disaster mitigation, those are actually, we're implementing BRIC right now by using that funding, but we're going to be creating an entire new grant program next year. The first year of BRIC will be fiscal year 2020, next August. This is the last year for pre-disaster mitigation. So a lot of folks saw our notice of funding opportunity and said, this looks like the same old, very similar to what you've done in the past. And what we said is we wanted to make it transparent and easy for people to apply for. We will work over the next year to build the brand new innovative BRIC program. So let me, that's quite a bit right there. So that $353 million, to give you a little bit of where that money came from, excuse me, came from the California wildfires, Hurricane Michael, Hurricane Florence. The 6-month lock-ins from those disasters helped create that $353 million in the piggy bank. So I'm going to talk about the next slide. Then maybe I'll stop after that. So what comes, where are we right now? So I mentioned we have an open application period. So the message I'd like to communicate to all of you that if you are working with the community, there is an open application period. We have $250 million that we made available for projects. So work with your state emergency management office. And if you're interested, they're very familiar. We have a lot of guidance documents out there about how to apply for funding. As we build BRIC, the new and innovative program, we're working a policy and program document through right now. We estimate that that will be available in the Federal Register for comments in the spring of next year. And as I mentioned, we'll make the first year of BRIC, those funds available sometime August, probably late summer of 2020. And we will open up the grant application period again, late September of 2020. So I'll stop there. I'll talk a little bit more about what BRIC is and what the stakeholders have told us, but I wanted to stop there and just kind of go through the mechanics of what is DRRA and what is PDM and what is the path forward for BRIC.
Questions?
Yep.
All right, so we're going to take questions, and we're having a little bit of trouble hearing audio through the phone. So Lori and Katie, I think what we'll do is we'll just, if folks have questions, please submit them through the Q&A or the chat window, and we'll take about 5 minutes and see if any folks have questions for Eric.
Will BRIC support communities that need to relocate from areas prone to chronic hazard risk, for example, coastal communities in Louisiana and Alaska? So one of the big questions that we receive is what is eligible? We have a hazard mitigation assistance guidance document that describes what is eligible right now. That the DRRA legislation has expanded and modified that. We are going through and providing a desktop update of that, but what we have funded under the Pre-Disaster Mitigation Grant Program, like for example, we fund a lot of small to medium-sized stormwater drainage projects. We do structure acquisitions, we do elevations, we do wind retrofits, we do generators, we do seismic retrofits of buildings. All of those projects are still eligible under BRIC. So having a real focus, the money is coming from the disaster relief funds. So we are looking to fund projects that reduce community risk, increase resiliency, but also protect against future DRF, disaster relief fund expenditures. So yes, those are eligible. To define, please define a community. Does that mean a municipality, or can it be a collaborative led by a nonprofit? So that's covered in our guidance document. Typically a nonprofit, if I'm not mistaken, has to go through a community. They cannot apply directly to a state. So say you are, Des Moines, Iowa, and you're a nonprofit in that community, you would need to go through the local community, and the community would have to then submit to the state. There's a person every state has called it's a great acronym, SHMO, State Hazard Mitigation Officer, and we have those listed up on our website. That person at the state level is responsible for, so typically a state will receive a lot of applications and they'll have to prioritize. That is all done at the state level. But in terms of how that process works and how you apply, that's covered in our hazard mitigation assistance guidance document.
There have been a couple of questions, Eric, on the past 7-year eligibility requirements. Can you go into a little bit more detail about eligibility?
Yes, so that is actually in the law. So as long as your state has received a disaster declaration in the last 7 years, you are eligible for BRIC. I believe every state right now is eligible for BRIC in 2020. In 2021, if a state doesn't have disasters, I think there are a few states that start to fall off the list. We have a list of all the disaster declarations up on our webpage. So at least for the first year of BRIC, if I'm not mistaken, every state is eligible.
Alrighty, so a couple of other questions have come in on definitions, and one is about how infrastructure is defined. Is this homes, businesses, schools, lifelines, etc.?
Great question. I'm going to get to that in a minute. If you could hold that thought. I'm going to talk about lifelines in a minute.
Got it. Let's see. Question came in on phase projects and advanced assistance.
Great. So advanced assistance is something that we have started a couple years ago. What essentially that is project scoping. So as of right now, in the existing pre-disaster mitigation grant program, you can apply for up to $200,000 for advanced assistance. So the example that I like to use is a community is considering some kind of a stormwater management project to reduce the flood levels in the community. But they may not have the resources to, they may not have enough staff or resources to do all the modeling that would be, if we raised a levee here or changed the drainage patterns here, how would it change the water surface elevations? And those are needed, both the pre and post water surface elevations, for our benefit cost ratio and to understand the project. So we will give you up to $200,000 to essentially, hire an engineering firm or do whatever hydrology and hydraulic studies that you need to determine if that's a viable project or not. It's really like project scoping. Last year was the first year that we made that available. It is also in the notice of funding opportunity this year. Last year we are actually undersubscribed in that area, so we're looking. We definitely would like to try to make communities more aware of advanced assistance, and we would like them to take advantage of it, because I know we've heard from a lot of communities that they don't have the resources to apply for projects.
So we'll do maybe one more question before we move on to some of the additional slides, because I think some of the questions that folks have posed will be addressed in the rest of the presentation. But a clarifying question on eligibility around whether or not, a county was affected by a declared disaster. Does that mean that that county is still eligible to apply as a sub-applicant?
Yes. So as long as the state is, if any part of your state was declared, your county does not have to be declared to be eligible for BRIC. That's my understanding of the law.
All right, folks, so we'll get back to the presentation, but we'll loop back on more questions at the end. Thank you so much.
So let me talk about Lifelines infrastructure. So a question came in about what is infrastructure. We're working to help define that and provide a little bit more guidance. Really after Harvey, Irma, and Maria, we've changed the way at FEMA that we've looked at certainly in response. And if you haven't seen a recent copy of the National Response Framework, that's really the first document that talks about the lifelines. So how do we help stabilize lifelines in communities? If you think about Puerto Rico, you think about the Camp Fire, we went back and looked at where we have made awards for pre-disaster mitigation and how do they line up with these lifelines. And this is a real challenge because lifelines are typically, in many cases, owned and operated by the public sector, but they're absolutely vital for community resiliency. And that's something, I know a lot of folks on the phone work with hazard mitigation planning. Have we considered lifelines to the extent possible that we need to in working with hazard mitigation plans? Throughout the agency, we are looking at lifelines and saying, how do our programs be reflective of mitigating those lifelines, knowing that they're so essential for communities' recovery? And so looking as we build BRIC, we're asking these questions of ourselves as well. How do we, the example that I like to use, if we're going to mitigate a hospital, an application may come in for a generator, and that's eligible and that's fine. But if we're going to really mitigate that hospital, let's look at the power and the water and the medical gases and the communications. Let's mitigate the entire hospital and let's look at all of those lifelines, because if one of them fails, typically that hospital will go offline and we have to evacuate patients, what have you. So we're looking at things a little bit differently. This is talked about quite a bit in our after action report from Harvey, Irma, and Maria. So I talked about a lot of these already: the role of planning, the role of the private sector, the funding amount in the caps, and also with, we've received a lot of input about nature-based infrastructure. So, as we build BRIC, we may have years where it may be $100 million. We may have years that are $3 billion. And so how does that program, how does it transform from year to year, knowing that the funding amounts may be different? How do we drive different types of projects, maybe in a large year versus a smaller year? So a good example of a resilient infrastructure program is the 6-acre underground resiliency park in New Jersey that offers outdoor public recreation, amenities, but also has mitigation of flash flooding by providing storage. So 1.75 million gallons of storage. So this is one of the projects that came in under pre-disaster mitigation last year. What we're also trying to do is leveraging our federal dollars with non-federal dollars. So this is a great example where we awarded $10 million, but there were $47 million of non-FEMA monies that went into this project. We've received a lot of comments from communities saying, show us some examples of good projects that mitigate multiple lifelines, and that we are taking that under consideration, and we hope to provide more examples of the kind of projects that we'd like to fund with BRIC. On to the next slide. So stakeholder engagement. So I mentioned earlier that the Disaster Recovery Reform Act passed about a year ago. Our team here at FEMA worked very hard in the late spring, early summer to conduct extensive stakeholder engagement. And I think many of you on the phone probably participated in that. And we really thank you for your feedback. What we wanted to do is to explain what our path forward for BRIC was, but also open it up to everybody and say, we have an opportunity here to build a new grant program. What should the priorities be? If we're going to run a competition, how do we make awards, to the best projects that reduce risk? How do we help build state and local capacity and capabilities? And so we conducted a lot of in-person meetings. We had several webinars, and hopefully a lot of folks participated on those webinars where we described all of the rules of applicability and how to apply and what kind of policies we are trying to advance that particular year. And we used a platform called IdeaScale, where we formally solicited ideas from everybody. On to the next slide. We received over 5,000 comments, more comments on BRIC than FEMA received on its strategic plan, which was really impressive. And we received over 60 formal comment letters from a wide range of partners, from private industry to professional associations, to advocacy groups at the state, regional, and national level. We received letters from states, letters from communities, and they gave us, just a tremendous amount of great ideas of things that we should be using this opportunity that we have to create this new program. What are some things that we should do? So a lot of folks want to know, well, you received all these great letters and comments. What did everyone say? And so I made, my commitment to Congress and to everyone, all the stakeholders who commented on this, is we will read and design a program that is reflective of the priorities that we have here at FEMA, supporting our strategic plan, creating a culture of preparedness, reducing losses and suffering, what I talked about earlier in the presentation. But we'd like to hear from our stakeholders and hear what they have to say about it. So some ideas, and this isn't a complete summary, but there are some things that floated to the top. Increased funding for technical assistance and capacity and capability building activities. A lot of states and local governments don't have the staff and need access to better tools and resources and data to submit applications and really take their hazard mitigation plans and operationalize them. Comments with evaluation and performance monitoring of BRIC funded projects. There were some concerns that as we fund infrastructure projects, those take longer to complete. There are changes of scope. How do we design a program where there's flexibility on the applicant side? That's the point across the slide as well. Shifts in budgets, project work schedules. How can we make it easier to implement and run the actual program? A lot of comments about adoption and enforcement of recent building codes while allowing for flexibility. So we have, with our Pre-Disaster Mitigation Grant Program, we have promoted the latest building codes and standards, and that has been one of the criteria that we've used to make awards. So we had a lot of folks that supported that. We had a lot of folks comment that said, well, my state doesn't have this version of this code, or we don't have the ability to implement it. So please take that under consideration. So how do we promote building codes and standards? Because we know that they work while allowing for flexibility. Lesson sharing of successful projects at various scales. I did talk about that. We've heard that so many times over and over again. FEMA, share with us some good projects, share with us the kind of projects that you'd like to fund. Collaboration with other agencies. There are other agencies, NOAA, the Corps, HUD, and there are certainly many, a lot of states have put money into mitigation. There's a lot of nonprofits in this space. So how can we collaborate together to work across programs and organizations to support positive outcomes? And how can BRIC not just be a standalone stovepipe type of grant, but how can we best partner and work with our federal partners and state partners and local partners to drive mitigation? I think the word infrastructure in the bill was a change, and a lot of folks Congress is telling us to consider infrastructure, but there was support for both large and small mitigation activities. So as FEMA, and we did a lot of this after Hurricane Sandy, post-disaster. If you look at some of the larger mitigation projects of hospitals and water and wastewater treatment plants, we funded a lot of very large mitigation activities. So if we fund a lot of those great large-scale mitigation activities that are really going to move the needle for a community, a lot of folks were saying, well, what about the smaller projects, the standard acquisition, elevations, smaller stormwater projects? Are those going to be eligible? Is there going to be money for them? So how do we design a program that's reflective of both of those? If you've ever applied, we have whole courses on benefit cost ratios, and I don't have time to get into it. We are required to have a benefit cost ratio greater than 1, and we received a lot of comments that FEMA, you need to do more to make it easier to meet that threshold with pre-calculated benefits or training. We have a new benefit cost tool that we just released. So that was probably the number 1 or number 2 comment, was just better help with benefit cost ratios. How can you make it easier for us to apply for grants? So I'll end there. I really wanted to spend time trying to answer questions. I mean, that is our standard slide deck that we have here. So again, we're trying to build BRIC to support the priorities of the agency, tie it to our strategic plan of building a culture of preparedness, prepare the nation for catastrophic disasters, and also reducing complexities. The monies from BRIC are, again, coming from the Disaster Relief Fund. And so how do we make cost-effective and smart investments of taxpayer dollars before disaster strikes that are going to help save lives and reduce federal, state, and local costs in the long run? So what we're trying to do, in terms of questions for the audience, you know, some of the other things that we heard were small and impoverished communities. We heard a lot of questions about green infrastructure. How can we promote green infrastructure? We had a lot of comments about planning. A community is required to have an up-to-date hazard mitigation plan to be eligible to apply. We have, you know, helped fund planning grants for communities under pre-disaster mitigation for years. And so what is the role going to be in the future? How can we better tie hazard mitigation planning to supporting projects in BRIC? And so a lot of those priorities that I just shared with you, you know, are questions that we have, are questions that I've given to our team. And so our team is working through the comments that we received, working through several courses of action, and we'll be making decisions about what BRIC will look like so we can get the notice of funding opportunity published and approved by August of next year. I should say I'd say managing expectations, some of these larger questions, like for example, how would risk be used to make an award? If one community has much higher risk than another, should that project be a priority? We may not have all of the answers in year 1 of BRIC for some of these very large questions. So I've thrown a lot of questions out there. You've given us a lot of feedback. We're going to be working through it and making decisions and build a new transformative mitigation program. So why don't I end there and try to answer the many questions that have come in.
All right, so what we'll do is look through the questions that are coming in both through the chat and through the question and answer box. One question that came in was, is there any mechanism for a territory to obtain a waiver to exempt them from the 25% match? For example, a territory undergoing a severe financial crisis?
I may have to get back to you on that and ask the staff. There is a 75-25 match, I believe, for every application. There is a 90-10 match if you're a small impoverished community and that is described in our notice of funding opportunity. I think it has to be a population of less than 3,000 people, and there's some economic criteria that go along with that. I don't believe there's any way to get a 100% match. Now, what communities will do, excuse me, is that if there are HUD monies available at your state level, HUD monies typically come into a different state office. It's typically, but not always, a state housing office, whereas our funds come through a state emergency management office. The HUD funding can, if you have available community development block grant, CDBG, DR, disaster grants, and there was, Congress just appropriated many billions of dollars of HUD funds. Those HUD funds can be used to make up that 25% match. Also, your in-kind contributions from your community can be used from your staff time, what have you, can be used for that 25% match. And our guidance documents describe all of the criteria for meeting that 25%. But so if you're in a state, one of the first questions I would have is, are there HUD community development block grant monies available that could potentially be used for that match? So that's, Sean, that's one of your questions there. Could funding under the BRIC program be leveraged using other disaster recovery funding? Yes. The HUD monies, and it's much more common for it to be used for post-disaster funding, but very often we will see, we're doing a lot of that right now in Puerto Rico, Texas, Florida, Virgin Islands, where the HUD monies are used along with any of our FEMA mitigation grants. The HUD monies are available for a match.
All right, another question. For states with enhanced natural hazard mitigation plans, will BRIC offer additional funds or streamlined application pathways?
That's a good question. We are looking at that. States that are managing states or states with enhanced plans, states that have gone above and beyond the normal or managing some parts of the mitigation grant programs at the state level. How should we take that in consideration? Should we, number one, and number two, if so, how should we take that into consideration if they submit an application under BRIC? Should we bump it up on the priority list because they're an enhanced plan state? Should we, do a point-based system and give them points for something like that? That's a good question, and that's an open question.
All right, so taking a question from the chat window, do you know what other pre-calculated benefits you are working on?
I don't know of anything right now. I know we've done a lot in the wind and wildfire space recently. I don't know of anything right now that we are working on. I know that we are always looking, and if you have suggestions for us, we're always looking to do more with pre-calculated benefits. I think that the challenge there is, do we have the data? Like, we've elevated a lot of homes, acquired a lot of homes. We've done a lot of like wildfire wind retrofits where we have data, and if we can look at a house type and say, we have data to say if your price is below a certain amount and you have a home of this type, we know that the benefit cost is going to be greater than 1. So we've pushed things pretty far in terms of where we have data sets, but we're always looking. We've seen a lot of comments on this. FEMA, give us more pre-calculated benefits. We would love to do more in that space.
A related question on BCA. For the new BCA model, is there updated training available for it?
Yeah, I believe there is. It's a completely new model, much more user-friendly. You can download it. It's up on our website, but I think it's a Microsoft app. It just updates on your, like a spreadsheet based. Yes, and there's training available for that. It is just really a different platform. It requires less user input, and I think we just released that a few months ago. So we're looking for input on that. Does it work? Does it make it easier? Our goal is we have to require a benefit cost ratio. What can we do in terms of training, technical assistance, outreach? How can we make it as easy as possible for folks to apply?
So there are a couple of questions on the kind of selection process and how FEMA is going to weigh different projects. So one specific question, will the selection process for competitive grant funds under BRIC be similar to the process that is used currently for HMA funds?
Yes, so one of the questions, under pre-disaster mitigation, we were required by law to, I think it was 575 to each state. So yes, we will be running a competition. Would it be for all of the amount, or would we do a set aside? Yes. How that competition will be structured is very much open-ended right now. But yes, we are looking to do a competition.
Related question, how will FEMA weigh regional mitigation plans versus locality mitigation activity?
But I'm not sure how to answer that. How will FEMA weigh? I mean, you have to have your community or county, depending how you're structured, needs to have a hazard mitigation plan, and the state has to have a hazard mitigation plan. We have seen regional mitigation plans. We certainly encourage regional mitigation plans. I don't believe we've given, if you're in a community that's part of a regional plan versus one where your community has a standalone plan, I don't think we've given any separate weighting for regional plans versus individual plans in the past.
Another question, what are the top 3 things you would recommend communities do to prepare for BRIC while the policy is being approved?
That's a great question. So I would say, look at your, make sure you have an updated hazard mitigation plan, number 1, because you're required to have an updated hazard plan to be eligible. What does that plan say? Is it up to date? Does it have the most recent risk data for your community? And then how do you take that hazard plan? You've identified areas of high risk. What are you doing? Have you applied for grants in the past? So I would be familiar with our hazard mitigation assistance guidance document. What kind of projects are eligible under BRIC right now? And if you have projects identified in your hazard mitigation plan, I would work within your community, to help identify. One of the biggest challenges is to identify, the 25% match. If you're not that far along and you're not really sure what the project is, you could apply for advanced assistance to maybe do a study to help understand what to do about a particular area. If you have a bunch of homeowners that want to be bought out or elevated, start going out and soliciting the information that you need from them. Typically, a lot of states will require a community to submit the application, by Christmas, the end of December. So I would definitely, the third thing I'd say would be talk to your state hazard mitigation officer. And if you have some, ideas for projects, like I know in Maryland, I think they submit you submit like a 1-page letter of interest, and the state will work with you to help develop your application. But I would definitely call your state emergency management agency or whoever is administering BRIC and understand what that process is going to be in the state, and maybe ask for some projects that have been funded in your state in the past. Maybe talk to those communities, ask them what were some of their challenges if you haven't applied for a grant in the past.
Another question, kind of similarly, aside from the funding amount and funding mechanism, what are the key differences between PDM and BRIC?
I think, BRIC, we haven't defined what those priorities are going to be. All of those consider all those things that were given to us about green infrastructure and risk-based and planning. How do we build a program that's going to really move the needle to make communities more resilient and reduce risk? with things with building codes. So how can we truly make the nation more resilient? Designing a program that's going to be reflective of outcomes. And whereas pre-disaster mitigation, I think the same kind of projects are going to be eligible, but I think like with Lifelines, how do we incentivize behavior that's gonna really move the needle? And we don't have all those answers yet on what that program's going to look like. So we're very excited about making a lot of decisions about that in the near future.
So we're coming up on our closing time, so we'll maybe just take one or two more questions before we hand it back to Lori and Katie to close up the hour. Under BRIC, will the FEMA BCA consider critical infrastructure mitigation activities that address multiple hazards? So for instance, a solar battery backup microgrid system that provides redundant power for critical facilities in a public safety power shutoff scenario related to wildfire hazard, but also serves to increase local energy resilience for the earthquake hazard or hurricane, flood, etc.
That's a really good and detailed question. I believe the answer to that is yes. You can mitigate against multiple hazards. So if you, and we see that very often, if you're elevating a structure in Charleston, South Carolina, that's a seismically prone area, if you have to do it in a way that conforms with the building code, you're going to be mitigating against multiple hazards. So if your project mitigates multiple hazards, you can receive benefits against those multiple hazards. Hazard mitigation action quality standard. I'm not really sure what that means. I mean, we have standards for our hazard mitigation plans. I mean, projects come in across multiple different hazard types. So really, I think the standard that we use at FEMA is the building codes, the international building codes. So our projects have to conform to, I think in BRIC, it's one of the last two editions of the international building codes. So that's probably the standard that we rely on most closely. But
go ahead.
no, but if there's other standards that would apply for like Lifelines, those are things we need to look into as well.
Alrighty, so I think what we'll do is turn it back over to Lori and Katie. We are going to put ourselves on mute and then dial into the line, so there might be a couple of seconds while we're transitioning over, but we'll turn it over to you all now.
Okay, thank you so much, Ashton, for the wonderful facilitation. And Eric, thank you so much for the presentation and for your willingness to respond to the questions that came in during this webinar. It's very clear from the response we've received here that both that there are many questions for clarification, but also that people out there are really eager to contribute. And so thank you so much for identifying some of the ways that researchers and other professionals on the ground can really add their voice to this process as BRIC moves forward. And so again, Eric, thank you so very much. And we are very much looking forward to seeing the results as FEMA continues to work with these many partners to build more just, sustainable, and resilient communities. So in addition to thanking Eric for the presentation, we want to again offer our gratitude to FEMA and to the National Science Foundation for making this Making Mitigation Work webinar series possible. We also thank each of you for joining us today. Before we close, two final reminders. First, if you plan to receive credit for attending this webinar, please contact Katie Murphy, and her email address is on the screen, and it is Catherine with a K, catherine.murphy-1@colorado.edu to receive your certificate of attendance if you are planning on applying this webinar toward your one continuing education unit toward your emergency management training certification. And again, we thank the International Association of Emergency Managers for partnering with us to make this possible. Second, we hope that you will mark your calendars for our next webinar, which will be Tuesday, November 12th from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern. That webinar will feature Colin Ford, who is Associate Manager with the Fiscal Federalism Initiative at the Pew Charitable Trusts. Colin will join us to present on recent research and analysis of disaster spending and mitigation at the state level. And trust us, he has an interesting story to tell. You can find more information on our website at hazards.colorado.edu. This is also where we will post the webinar recording, slides, and additional resources from today's webinar, as well as where you can find more information on past and future webinars in this series. Again, thank you to Eric, FEMA, and to all of you for joining with us today. It is clear that there is much work to be done, and we look forward to working alongside you to do that work. On behalf of the entire team here at the Natural Hazard Center, we hope to see you again next month. Please take care of yourself and others.